Since the end of Endgame, the MCU has been on a steady decline. It was subtle at first, with their projects immediately after being praised for their quality and storytelling, but as Marvel released more and more projects, it became clear that the spark was gone. Disney had built the MCU in such a way that any project attached to the franchise was a guaranteed hit, but starting with flops like Quantumania and Love and Thunder, that no longer remains true. With the current state of the MCU being questionable to say the least, is it possible to go back? When the MCU was first getting its start, it was impossible to know just how far it would go. Phase 1 of the MCU was comprised of movies that stood entirely on their own, but showed hints of being more connected, with inclusions like Phil Coulson and S.H.I.E.L.D. being involved in just about every movie. The MCU has been going on for 17 years now, and it is a far cry from those humble beginnings. What started out as a series of slightly connected movies coming together into something bigger slowly evolved into a franchise that you need to be committed to in order to know what's happening. And I, like many people, don't want to do that. It's so exhausting keeping up with the MCU, trying to piece together why Wanda is suddenly a psychotic villain, or why Fisk had to recover for months in Born Again. By the way, it's because he gets shot in the head in Hawkeye, for those of you wondering. This change happened gradually, with Marvel ramping up the connections between movies more and more after the first Avengers movie. During this time, these connections were mostly just fun and weren't very punishing to people who didn't want to keep up with every MCU movie. Generally, the plots were contained to each individual movie, with any connections between them at least being mentioned so everyone knows what's going on, like mentioning the events of Age of Ultron that led to Civil War. These smaller connections and the fact that these movies were actually good and entertaining made it easy to engage and keep up with the MCU, up to a certain point. Infinity War, and by extension Endgame, were the first movies in the franchise where it might have felt punishing if you hadn't kept up to that point. But that only made sense. This was the event that the entire MCU had been leading up to at that point. If you were in the theater watching these movies, you either had been keeping up with the MCU anyway, or you didn't care because your friends just dragged you there. It's after Endgame that the problems started to show themselves. The expectation that most fans had, myself included, was a sort of return to form. Obviously things wouldn't be exactly the same just because of how big of an event it was, but most people assumed that the MCU would continue with the trend of good, self-contained projects, and it seemed like they would at first. Far From Home, WandaVision, and Loki were all released almost immediately after Endgame, and people loved them. They were fun and creative, and they did a great job of showing the repercussions of Endgame. There were some disappointments in the mix, but that was also true during the first half of the MCU. They can't all be winners. But it was the release of Multiverse of Madness that really displayed the new direction of the MCU. Leading up to its release, people were excited to see it. With confirmation of Scarlet Witch being included and rumors of the villain being someone like Nightmare or Baron Mordo, it was shaping up to be another fun ride. And for the most part it was. People didn't hate it. But there was a problem that wasn't really being brought up very much. Scarlet Witch was the main villain. Now if you had watched WandaVision, this would have made perfect sense. If you had watched WandaVision, an 8-hour-long TV show exclusively on Disney+. This was the new direction of the MCU. Everything is connected. If you want to know the plot of Doctor Strange, you have to watch WandaVision, even though he has nothing to do with that show. This new direction, where every new movie and every new TV show was necessary to understand the plot of the next one, was straight up a bad choice. Especially when you combine that with the fact that they started releasing so many more projects than they ever have before. And many of them didn't look good at all. Maybe if every project was the absolute best thing to come out of the MCU, it'd be less of an issue. But even if that were the case, there's just so much content in the MCU that most people would rather just watch something else. The MCU was so much fun in the beginning, and the conclusion of Endgame was so exciting, but now it just feels like work. I groan at every new announcement Marvel comes out with, and I haven't seen any MCU project in theaters since Love and Thunder. And I know I'm far from the only one who feels this way. Even the head of Marvel, Kevin Feige, admitted in a Wall Street Journal article that the MCU has started to feel more like homework than entertainment. Now, here's the thing. I get the vision. I understand what they were going for. They wanted to make the MCU into something like the comic books, where plotlines cross between different comics, and we could see different characters interacting in each other's movies, and it sounds really fun when you put it like that. But movies just can't work like that. Studios need actors and directors and writers and a whole lot of other people just to make one movie. And all of those people need to schedule time to do that work, and if they don't have the time, they can't do it. This is how we end up with Tom Holland doing voiceover work while his stunt double does most of the on-screen work in the upcoming Spider-Man movie. Do you realize that Mahershala Ali was announced as the new Blade 6 years ago? And this is all we've seen of that character since then.
Sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?
I used to be a huge fan of the MCU. I watched every movie that came out, and I always tried to watch them in theaters if I could. But with each new release and announcement, it just became daunting to try to watch everything. So I stopped. I made a choice to only watch the movies and shows that I was actually excited to see. And the result of that is that I hadn't watched a new MCU project for years until Daredevil Born Again released. And even that show just had to be connected to another completely unrelated project. And it seems like Kevin Feige wants to scale things back to make it a little more tolerable, but for me, and I assume a lot of others out there, I'm not really interested in coming back to the MCU. I might watch a new movie if any of them catch my interest, but overall, I'm just kind of over it.